Boards of Canada have been one of the leading acts in the past 2 decades of electronic music. They've been signed to Warp Records, one of the most influential labels in it, for the entirety of their career. They're made up of brothers Marcus Iowan and Michael Sandison, and I always picture these guys as like hermits in the woods, since they dwell outside the public sphere and create pretty isolating works that feel much more motivated by their surroundings than pop culture. Their sound design ranges from distant and sickening to lustrous and warm. Their name is pulled from the National Film Board of Canada, which is fitting since their sampling sounds like playback from an old radio or tape. And when they use vocal snippets, the fact you can tell the age and gender and picture the person it involves adds a striking personal touch. Heavy use of what they've termed a mystery analog synth spreads a brisk, sour tone into their sound. Their cover art works with each album's niche of sensations to arouse a vivid picture and make the colors swirl around in your mind as it plays. And since their brand of IDM is a pretty intuitive corner of music, it pushes people to different interpretations, which is why sharing perspectives is the move. And even your least favorite of BOC's material can sink in further with a change in setting and time. I'll be leaving out EPs in this ranking, but their career did start with the Twoism and High Scores EPs in 95 and 96, and also Don't Let In a Beautiful Place Out in the Country slip by you because it's pretty swag. So first up in my best to worst is Gio Gotti. When thinking about this album, I always picture wreckage, threatening shadows, desaturated color, and emptiness where there shouldn't be. It makes me feel separated from time, life, any sense of order. It's like waking up in a ghost town, just abandoned and demolished buildings all around you, acknowledging your surroundings and that you'll never know the familiarity of your past life again, or watching some civilization plunge towards catastrophe from an outside perspective, and mourning how everyone's slowly inching towards an ultimate suffering in the same way our existence is. The record uses excessively muffled loops that sound like they've been run through ancient tape recorders or doused in numerous effects. There are reverse passages, words spelled backwards, satanic references like the ones in 1969 or Alpha and Omega. There's also the runtime of the album being 6606, which the main arrangement in Devil Is in the Details is also a reference to. A track where glossy synths bounce and pair up with samples that scratch and gnaw and add a human touch, as ghostly vocal surges encompass everything, during which robotic voices manipulated to feel underwater suggest that you let them enter your mind and put you completely at ease and assure that you have the power to direct your life in whatever way you so desire. And even though this seems encouraging on paper, their context in the track makes it feel more like being hypnotized against your will. But Gio Gotti isn't constantly traumatizing. It emotionally resembles a comfortably sorrowful ending to an existence in some moments. I think the descending synth chords that lullaby the opener are a great example of this. Over the Horizon Radar 2. And it can still stretch to transcendence. Like, for example, Dawn Chorus sounds like breathing in the air around you and soaking in all of life's beauty. Its drones are like wind currents enveloped in dust that blow over top of gleaming samples covered in effects and hushed in the mix. But the vocal sample of a child that sounds like they're reacting to something out of the ordinary, as if they know something cryptic no one else does, jolts you back to the record's intimidating grasp. In a sense, I think Sunshine Recorder acts as the moment you're somehow content to be in this desolate abyss, especially fixating on its repetition of Beautiful Place and An Eagle in Your Mind. I love the synth pads that feel like a stream of smoky haze halted by a sidechain effect as the drums ripple. The last 3 minutes is really where things transcend, with new circuits of pads and specks of vocals and sharp shimmers. It feels like watching the world pass by in front of you. And the organic touch of the album is reinforced on the interlude Dandelion, whose soundscape is entirely reversed, over which Leslie Nielsen's voice explores theories of evolution by describing these organisms whose biological makeup is completely unknown, most likely to raise questions of life's complexities. The tone is maintained on the beach at Red Point, which starts with these drafts of drones covered with flakes of texture, primordial samples, and congas. It slowly ascends with snippy drum machines, then fuses in airy growls and stuttering vocal hits. Really, this record opens up to be more tormenting once you have the knowledge of its underlying references, because then it's like, what the fuck were these hoes on? But being left in the dark isn't necessarily comfortable either. Like, for example, if you didn't know what the number station sample on Gyroscope was speculating why this troubled kid sounds like they're being forced to recite a code would just contribute to your unease, especially against these slowly bleeding drones and a pummeling drum pattern wrapped in a soft static, which overwhelms everything and drags you into its world with no choice but to succumb to its power. Music as Math is a clear standout, I feel. It has one of the most careful progressions without sacrificing any poignancy. It's such an enchanting draw-in moment for the album's beginning. It maintains a wash of weeping synths and drones and a drum pattern that sucks you in like a tornado. It closes out with swelling vocals melting into this wasteland of sound that sizzles and splashes around. And Alpha and Omega also thrives on how thorough and meticulous it is. Its sweeping flutes have to be one of the album's most memorable highs. And finally, while Gio Gotti is an uproar of different emotions, Diving Station is stripped to another plane of heartbreak entirely. It's like sobering up and accepting complete demise, and genuinely harder to stomach than any other track here. Ultimately, though, I think this effort reached heights that Boards of Canada didn't anywhere else. Its demented, ritualistic pull is incredibly persuasive, and it's the only release of theirs to which every single second of the runtime feels crucial to its larger picture. The only reason why I can't smack a 10 on this thing is because I generally reserve that score for albums I have a legitimately spiritual or unmatched experience with, or with some kind of personal relevance to me, but I still love it dearly, so I would give it a 9 out of 10. Next up, we've got Tomorrow's Harvest. This album reads to me like a dreary storm or an icy forest, or watching a world run by industry dig itself deeper into a hole and deteriorate from a murky lens as if it's a vague memory from your past life. It feels like slowly being stripped to just matter, the bare essentials of feeling. It's more of a serenade to the end of the world than a warning in the way Gio Gotti is. This track has these loose cinematic loops piled up which feel like the initiation of a new sort of consciousness or sacrificing yourself to some greater force, which is reflected in how the bass drum hammers into a fog and later a landscape of swelling pads become victim to gradually rising and churning synths. And typically Tomorrow's Harvest pulls from a base of bubbling synth melodies, rigid synth bass, bulky drums, and boundless drones. And it's a grower, so take the time to let its sheets of textures unfold and wash over you because they really seal the deal. For example, Split Your Infinities has this swarm of particles that sound like they're trying to manifest something greater, and the oozing drones and filtered vocal samples are a backdrop for the drums to clack and slice through it. And it has resonant melodic moments as well, like the pianos in Nothing Is Real sing out into oblivion as if they're echoing from a dark alley. And the sense of sheer anguish in White Cyclosa's weeping synths, paired with a seething that resembles a helicopter passing overhead, makes up for the fact that it could be seen as not as beefy as the other cut. Cold Earth's approach to building and maintaining momentum is impeccable. These washed out forlorn layers pile on top of intricately tangled drums with tinfoil-esque hi-hats and eventually vibrating vocal stabs, which also appear with quite a pull at the end of Palace Posey, whose drums steadily lumber over slippery bass synths and drones. New Seeds is another peak, and has these squirming, colliding loops connected by a web of tension. I think the closer's more dry, ghastly drones are a conclusive way of absorbing all of its emotion. This more withdrawn approach is something I think Sundown tries to pull off, but there doesn't seem to be any logic behind its sequencing in the album. That brings me to the worst part of this record, a few of the interludes. Your Ritual doesn't achieve anything other tracks don't. Generally, I think this album retreads the same ground pretty consistently, which leads to some stunners being lost in at sea. But Collapse is most likely my favorite, which is engulfed in a drape of misty noise. Telepath's pretty moving, forces you back down to bleakness after Jacquard Causeway just like mercilessly obliterates my fucking eardrum. Honestly, dude, I've tried to like the way the main melody is tampered with the more it repeats, but something about the way the layers pile and don't gel with the drums reads as auditory hell to me, and evidently isn't gonna change. Which brings it to a 7, but I put this album here because I feel it sculpts out its specific world and keeps me there more persistently than the other two, the better of which is Music Has the Right to Children, which does not feel like it came from our universe. It feels like stepping into this vast field of complete unknown, then realizing it's been colonized by extraterrestrials and you have to learn to adapt to their society. It uses samples of standard words and phrases that seem automated or from people's subconscious, adding a surrealist quality, especially when it's from children saying things beyond their understanding. My best guess on an interpretation is that It's done to generally reflect the life cycle or paint them as supernaturals. Like Aquarius is a great example of this. Its samples feel futuristic, otherworldly, mutated. Also think its drum machines' metallic clang complement it curiously well. On the whole though, this album is ghostly, celestial, sedative. It incorporates the tender feeling of a seaside in tracks like The Opener and Olsen, and hallucinogenic space travel in Triangles and Rhombuses. The drums sound either chunky and overbearing or fidgety and anxious, like in one of the most despondent tracks, An Eagle in Your Mind, whose percussive layers jitter with varying levels and timbres. It's all wrapped in this synth pad that just picks you up and pulls you into a sorrowful trance as the whispers sprinkled in delicately thud, and the instruments close out with a more blissful allure. And in a sense, the record is soothing and heavenly. See tracks like Turquoise Hexagon Sun, which has these luminous synths and muffled voices and balls clattering, which makes me feel like I'm in another room from an event going on where people are playing pool or some shit. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you have a track like Telephasic Workshop with these jabs of grubby vocals and authoritative drums that build tension against gliding, sodden synths. Progression can be noticed in the way the kick drums batter down in a row and the samples blanket up, and the way broken parts of vocals are assembled to still translate as conversation. Another brisk, exhilarating moment is Rue the Whirl, which has these clunky, machine-like drums that incorporate coarse swipes and a wispy melody with sudden stops and repetition initiated by a sample that resembles a bell clock tower. Also think 6010's combination of a hefty drum loop, a spazzing 808, and segments that sound like they're from a parade in an old film or something is actually sex. I love how it exits with the drums piling sharper twists and clanks. However, not every song evolves fluidly like this, which is my first gripe. Progressions are tightly interwoven to these songs to the point of the project not feeling holistically rewarding. Subtlety is cool, but having everything hidden between the lines rather than in the limelight can only do so much. And this album tries to pack a lot of contrasting tones together that aren't always logically sequenced, and some interludes are just non-essential detours that contribute to me losing patience with it, like Biney, Bokuma, Kaini Industries, especially with that weird sample at the end. Still though, it's a stellar display of capability for a debut and offers something unparalleled if you cherish strange IDM. It's just a touch frustrating for me because it's one of the few acclaimed albums in the genre I don't feel particularly attached to, so I would give it a 7. Alright, last and I guess technically least is the Campfire Head phase. One thing I will say about this release is that the cover art is like so fucking lame compared to the others. Like, I can't be the only one who thinks this. Like, it just looks like a random, like, family beach photo or, like, stock image with, like, a texture placed over it and just, like, a random shadow. Like, I mean, I guess it's not the worst thing in the world, but, like, compared to the others, come on. However, this was the only Boards of Canada release that could be classified as folktronica. A lot of guitar snippets here, and alongside the samples from Conversation and Nature, it emits a radiant and organic charm. It blends in frigid and mechanical ingredients smoothly despite its warm foundation. This is also the most down-tempo of their works. Drums occupy sluggish rhythms that trudge and pull you into a daze. It gives tracks like Hey Saturday Sun and Satellite Anthem Icarus a meditative quality. Some add suction and take control of the track, while others are live and crisp. Really, it offers everything, like a Technicolor dream, and all of it melts together so naturally. Like in the record's cryptic grooves, say Oscar See-Through Red Eye or 84 Pontiac Dream, where these sulking drum machines and an alien-like vocoder sample hover over currents of whirling loops, or in Chrome Key Dreamcoat, which has this compressed, twangy guitar and fluttering samples, and these drums that plod in succession against a soaring ambience with birds chirping subtly, and melodies that are stirred and rearranged in different ways. And a listen to Satellite Anthem Icarus is like a breath of fresh air. Its alleviating guitar loop and ocean samples can join with its watery, ornate loops seal its deal, and Peacock Tail embodies subtle beauty in a different fashion. It's led by lavish specks of guitar plucks and synthesizers while a gravelly snare hits it. Velvety vocal pads soon flow into it, and towards the end it foams up with additional samples. And even though this album has a soothing attribute to it, it wouldn't shy away from kicking you in the face. Like with Devon Cowboy, which is really its high, it feels like watching all of life flash before you in the form of lights and crushed stars and matter, reflected in its guitar wrapped in reverb and crackling distortion against a drizzle of hi-hats. Then these reverberating acoustic chords initiate its second phase, which erupts with strings and a colossal drum pattern and a stream of cymbals. But nevertheless, Campfire Head phase does have the most missteps in its sequencing and the fewest tangible takeaways. The gusty suction of Slow This Bird Down is enthralling, but it doesn't stay that way for an entire 6 minutes, especially when it employs yet another persistently lethargic drum rhythm that's just a stale technique by this point. And the fact it closes out by wearing the fuck out of the same tone in 3 separate tracks, the last of which has a 5-minute fade out, is a tad difficult to get behind. And sometimes I think the efforts throwaway interludes were placed at the beginning, so you're not bored enough of the album yet for it to be a huge issue. Like, Sherbird Head is far too long for what it offers. A Moment of Clarity is really empty and awkwardly placed. I guess Atar and Cronin has a more frail, free-flowing ambiance that works nicely, and Constance Are Changing's bare guitar and roaming synths are a bit trance-inducing. Still, generally, I think there's more than enough body to this release to warrant a listen. Sometimes I think Tomorrow's Harvest and Campfire Head phase aren't taken as seriously since they're literally expected as the comeback albums not to match up to the others, when honestly I could see these ranked in any way. So yeah, that's the end of my best to worst. I hope you enjoyed it. Comment your favorite Boards of Canada album, or maybe what you would rank all of their albums, or what artist I should cover next in a best to worst. I'm still pretty set on One of Tricks Point Never, but who knows, maybe one of you will change my mind. Yeah, I will see you in the next video, whatever that is, whenever that is. I have no fucking idea, but yeah, thanks for sticking around.